Okay, welcome to your next module. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to continue with our investigation of the different rock types. So previously you looked at minerals and igneous rocks, a lot of stuff, I know. And like I mentioned in that little intro video, we're kind of trying to blaze our way through the rocks part that we would normally spend lots of time on in another course, but because we're focusing on hazards here, we just want to touch on the basics, kind of get you through, make sure you have some good background knowledge so that we can evaluate the hazards better, right, with that background knowledge. So with your amazing knowledge of plate tectonics, interior of the earth, and the different rocks that are available to us, then we have a lot of the tools we need to do that. So what we're going to do for this one is we're going to finish up with the two next types. So that's sedimentary rocks and metamorphic rocks. So this module is set up really similar to the previous one. So there are two PowerPoints. There are two videos that you can watch of me walking through them. There's a little study guide with some terminology you should know. And so in general, a sedimentary rock is made of pieces of pre-existing rock. So we weather the existing rock that's on the surface. We break it down into smaller pieces. We transport it and we basically bury it and glue it together. So think of like sand turning into a sandstone. That's kind of the classic sedimentary rock that we would talk about. So there are other types, but that's the main way we get sedimentary rocks. But of course, as you work your way through the content here, you'll learn a little more about that. And then for metamorphic rocks, these are pre-existing rocks that have been altered. So they have been changed, and usually we're talking about lots of heat, lots of pressure, lots of fluids, and in combination we can alter the rocks without melting them. So we're not melting these rocks because that would be an igneous if that happened. But we are transforming them or have the ability with the fluids and the heat to move around some atoms and molecules and do some weird stuff, align some minerals and all that kind of craziness. So once again, you'll learn that there. So go through that and you'll be able to take the lecture quiz. For the article, I'm going to focus just on the sedimentary rocks, and in particular, a rock that you'll hear in the lecture called a limestone, which you probably have heard of. And there are two little articles here that I want you to look over because we're talking about hazards here. One of a common way we get a hazard, and not necessarily in Arizona, but back east, especially in Florida, sinkholes are a big deal. And they exist because of this particular type of sedimentary rock called a limestone. And so we'll touch on that a little bit in the sedimentary rock lecture, but this article is going to explain kind of the issues that we may have with this particular rock and the fact that it is soluble. So over time, we can dissolve things away and we can cause this surface to collapse and things like that. And we can investigate that further in the course, but this is just an introduction to basically why you're looking at sedimentary rocks for that. And then finally, for the homework, I'm going to have you look at some metamorphic rocks. So it's just some additional questions, stuff that was presented to you in the lecture that wasn't kind of asked of you in the lecture quiz, and some information from the metamorphic chapter. So that's in the additional resources. If you jump over here, there's some additional stuff on sed rocks if you're interested. Now, this gets in more detail than we need in both of these, probably, especially in metamorphic. So if you can't find the answers in the lecture and there's some additional information you need, you can find it here, but don't get lost in the details unless you, of course, love metamorphic rocks. Like I said, we want the basics so that we can use that to evaluate some of our hazards in the future. And of course, remember you do have a lab. The good news, I suspect, is this lab is almost identical to the previous lab that you did, except that we're looking at sed rock. So we have a sed chart and you have a chart for metamorphic rocks. So this video is basically telling you how you use those charts, just like we did for igneous rocks, right? You're going to evaluate different properties of the rocks and use the charts to name them and find some other issues or things that we want you to know about the rocks. And then, of course, as you get into the lab itself, there is a little tutorial there that walks you through, just like the other one. And in this case, instead of minerals, we're going to look at two different rock types. So images about rocks for sed, images of rocks metamorphic, and then some additional questions about some rocks and maps and things like that. So that's what you're going to do this week. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about what you're doing, please don't hesitate to contact me. And then after this, we'll get into the hazards and look at some volcanoes and earthquakes and all that kind of crazy stuff. So, all right, good luck.